What if the greatest weapon of the Roman Empire wasn't the sword, but the mind? Before a single battle was fought, Rome had already begun to win by turning fear into loyalty, doubt into discipline, and ordinary men into unstoppable soldiers. Their generals didn't just command armies, they controlled belief itself. In this story, you're going to discover the hidden psychological tricks that built the most powerful military the ancient world had ever seen. From fearsome punishments to carefully crafted hope, from shining armor designed to intimidate, to speeches that could make a man forget fear entirely, Rome conquered not just lands, but hearts and minds. Stay with this until the very end, because once you learn how Rome truly ruled its legions, you'll never think of ancient war the same way again. When most people think of Rome, the empire that stretched its influence across continents, they picture conquering legions, the clatter of iron, the discipline of soldiers marching in perfect lines, and the brutal efficiency of a military machine unmatched in the ancient world. But the true strength of Rome lay not simply in its weapons or armor. It lay in the minds of the men who wielded them. Roman generals mastered a subtle and powerful art, controlling the emotions, beliefs, and morale of their armies. They understood that power rested not just in the sword, but in the ability to shape what soldiers felt about the battles they would fight. Inside every soldier, fear and loyalty strained against each other. Rome's success, more than any other empire, depended on which of those two won. Imagine for a moment a legionary standing in the dusty heat of a campaign far from home. He has left behind family, fields, and familiarity, marching through lands where he does not understand the language or customs. The only stability he has is the structure of the army, the familiar standards fluttering in the breeze, the commanding voice of his centurion, and above all, the confident figure of the general who claims responsibility for thousands of lives. If that general falters, morale collapses. If he stands firm, confidence spreads like wildfire. Roman commanders understood their soldiers were not machines. They were human, vulnerable to fear, driven by pride, desperate for purpose, and eager for recognition. Generals used every tool of psychology available long before the word psychology ever existed. One of the most visible techniques was the cultivation of authority through theatrics. Leadership was not assumed, it was performed. A Roman general's armor shone brighter than that of ordinary soldiers, polished to reflect sunlight and create the illusion of radiance. His horse was larger, his cloak longer, his helmet adorned with plumes meant to draw eyes upward. These weren't mere decorations. They were symbols that elevated the general into a figure who looked closer to a god than a man. The simple illusion mattered. If a leader appeared strong, soldiers believed he was strong. Perception shaped reality. This performance of power continued in every interaction. A general rarely addressed his troops casually. He spoke during high-stakes moments, before battle, after hardship, or when doubt spread. This scarcity of words increased their value. Silence, too, became a tactic. A pause before a command, a moment of studied consideration while soldiers watched anxiously. These subtle behaviors told the men their leader was not impulsive. His decisions carried weight. A soldier who trusted his leader's judgment would follow that leader into chaos, believing that order still guided their steps. But confidence alone was not enough. Rome knew how to bind men to duty through a mixture of fear and reward. Payment for service mattered immensely. Steady wages, plunder after victories, and donativa special bonuses a general distributed directly. These rewards were not handed out at random, but at precisely chosen times, after difficult marches, following brutal winters, or right before battles where morale needed a spark. To receive a coin from the general's hand was to feel personally acknowledged. It forged a silent contract, loyalty in exchange for prosperity. Even greater than money was the promise of land. When a soldier completed his service after years of marching and bleeding, he could earn his own farm. This was the Roman dream, a peaceful life of cultivation, where a former warrior could live as a respected citizen. Generals spoke about these promises often, describing the fertile soils waiting back in Italy or newly conquered provinces. Hope became a chain soft and invisible, but impossibly strong. A man who believes the future will reward his suffering can endure far more than a man who sees only the next sunrise. Yet alongside reward lurked the shadow of punishment. The Roman system of discipline remains infamous. Decimation, the execution of every 10th man in a disgraced unit, remains one of history's most brutal enforcement tools. It wasn't often used, not because commanders were merciful, but because the idea of it was enough. Soldiers whispered about it around campfires. They dreaded it like a curse. Punishment did not need to fall frequently to be effective. It only needed to feel ever present. Orders were followed not just out of respect, but out of survival. Reputation, too, was a tool sharpened by rumor. Stories circulated about certain generals known for their fury or their intolerance for disobedience. Whether those stories were entirely true hardly mattered. Fear of consequence stabilized the ranks. A soldier who hesitated endangered more than himself. He threatened the survival of the group. And Rome made sure every man understood that the collective mattered above all, but balancing fear was admiration. The most charismatic generals did something extraordinary. They remembered their soldiers, not as faceless bodies in formation, but as individuals. Julius Caesar excelled at this skill. He learned names, remembered past acts, and acknowledged personal sacrifice. For a legionary weathered by exhaustion, hearing Caesar call out that he had seen the courage displayed in a particular skirmish could ignite new reserves of strength. Caesar's familiarity was strategic. It made tens of thousands feel personally valued. Soldiers under him did not merely obey orders, they fought to earn his praise. The psychology of identity was another cornerstone of Rome's success. Soldiers were indoctrinated into the idea that they belonged to something greater than themselves, the legion. Discipline and training forged unity. The endless drills were not just to improve performance, they rewired the mind. Movements became synchronized. Breathing fell into rhythm. 100 men raised their shields to form a single wall, not because they understood the formation intellectually, but because their bodies had learned to move collectively. The individual dissolved into the group. To disrupt formation was to betray the brotherhood. Loyalty wasn't only vertical toward the general, it was horizontal too. Soldiers protected one another because identity was shared. The eagle standard, carried into every battle, symbolized this unity. It was the legion's soul. To lose it was to lose honor. Soldiers would throw themselves into hopeless danger rather than allow an enemy to capture the eagle. A general rarely needed to remind them. The standard's presence alone whispered expectations, bravery, duty, and sacrifice. Even camp life served psychological purpose. Roman encampments were constructed with mathematical precision, walls, ditches, internal roads, and strictly arranged tents. The repeated structure built mental stability. Wherever the army went, home followed. Routine diminished fear. Tasks filled free moments, so anxiety had no room to root. Cleanliness was enforced, not only to prevent disease, but to maintain the impression of order. Disorder breeds panic. Order breeds confidence. Rest was a tactical element. A wise general ensured that soldiers slept soundly before a battle whenever possible. Food, though plain, was consistent. Hunger could break spirits faster than any enemy. Something as simple as a full stomach communicated that leadership remained in control, that the army was protected even during uncertainty. Then there were the lies. Not malicious lies, perhaps, but carefully shaped truths. After setbacks, generals reframed failure as strategy. A lost position became a feigned retreat. A supply shortage became a temporary inconvenience. Soldiers were given belief before they needed reason. They weren't allowed to fall into despair because commanders understood psychological momentum. Once men think they will lose, they already have. Some generals elevated themselves into myth. Germanicus inspired devotion that bordered on fanaticism. Stories about his courage grew in the telling, each retelling inflating his legend. Soldiers who fought under such a leader felt invincible. Faith replaced fear. A general who became a symbol was more powerful than any formation diagram or tactical map. Before battles, speeches cemented morale. They were more than emotional encouragement. They were psychological architecture. The general would remind soldiers why the fight mattered. They were defending Roman superiority. They were protecting families back home. They were earning future glory. They were avenging insults. They were agents of history. The enemy was portrayed as dishonorable, cruel, or inferior. Hatred simplified decision-making. When faced with a threat, humans weigh risk. When faced with a hated enemy, they act without hesitation. Rome understood that a soldier who believes he fights for justice holds his shield higher. As night fell before combat, fear pressed heavily against each legionary's ribs. If a general hid himself away during those hours, doubt spread rapidly. The best commanders walked the camp, allowing soldiers to see them awake, alert, and unshaken. It communicated silently, "We stand together." A man who sees bravery in authority feels it awaken in himself. When dawn arrived, rituals continued. Priests made sacrifices, interpreting omens. The general appeared at the right moment, never too soon to seem anxious, never too late to seem careless. Every step, every gesture, was measured to maintain the illusion of command over fate itself. Soldiers entered battle believing the gods and their general stood behind them. It fortified courage in a way armor could not. In the frenzy of battle, once chaos thundered around them, loyalty to leadership became the anchor. Orders shouted with authority cut through surrounding noise. A general positioned prominently sometimes, recklessly proved physically what he had already declared with words. He would share the same danger as his men. That choice transformed authority into allegiance. After the battle, if victory was theirs, the general's role shifted into caretaker. He oversaw the distribution of spoils reward, immediately reinforcing belief that loyalty led to prosperity. He honored the dead with solemn ceremony, reinforcing the value of every life given. If the army lost, the general controlled the narrative, transforming failure into resilience rather than weakness. And beyond tactics in the field, political maneuvering shaped morale in subtle ways. Generals lobbied for triumphs in Rome, parades that allowed soldiers to march as conquerors through cheering crowds. These ceremonies etched memories of pride permanently into the psyche. Once a soldier tasted glory, he would chase it again. The genius of Roman psychological warfare was that soldiers rarely recognized its full extent. It became part of the environment shaping thoughts, but remaining invisible. To survive, the general had to maintain the confidence of thousands. The stability of the empire depended not only on laws or legions, but on the commander's ability to persuade men to do extraordinary things while believing those acts were ordinary. Loyalty, fear, hope, pride, unity, hatred, all these emotions were used as tools. Rome forged them meticulously into weapons just as real and powerful as swords and shields. Yet the most dangerous moment for Rome was when loyalty shifted from the state to the general. Caesar crossed the Rubicon because his soldiers followed him rather than the Senate. Armies loyal to individuals rather than institutions drove the civil wars that ended the Republic. The psychological bonds that held the military together became the wedge that split the nation apart. In that irony lies the brilliance and the doom of Roman strategy. Their generals became masters of minds, capable of turning ordinary men into unstoppable force. But once soldiers' devotion flowed to the man instead of to Rome, no law could restrain ambition. Even emperors, long after the Republic's fall, lived and died by the moods of their armies. A general beloved by troops could overthrow a ruler in weeks. Fear changed sides. Authority belonged not to those in marble palaces, but to those whose speeches stirred hearts in the mud of distant camps. Still, Rome maintained dominance for centuries because most of the time, its psychological machinery worked. Generals orchestrated loyalty like conductors guiding a symphony of human emotion. They understood the mind was the ultimate battlefield. If a soldier believed he could win, the empire could conquer lands beyond the horizon. If he doubted, even defending Rome's heart would become impossible. You might never stand in formation beneath a scorching Mediterranean sun. You might never grasp a gladius or shield. But the strategies Rome perfected echo through history and modern leadership. Appearance shapes respect. Hope maintains endurance. Order stabilizes fear. Identity creates unity. Recognition inspires loyalty. Communication directs courage. Roman generals did not need to study psychology. They learned through consequence. Every success reinforced the value of their methods. Every failure sharpened their understanding of human nature. Today, when we look at crumbling ruins and dusty relics, it is easy to assume Rome's greatness rested entirely on brute force. But beneath the armor and formations, beneath the strategies recorded in scrolls and textbooks, there was always a quieter foundation. Emotional architecture. A system of invisible strings connecting leader and follower, belief and action, fear and duty. Rome conquered the ancient world not only because its armies were strong, but because its generals understood the minds of the men who made those armies strong. And when the empire finally crumbled, it was not because its soldiers forgot how to fight, but because its leaders forgot how to lead the mind. Thank you for spending this quiet time with me tonight. I hope this slow journey through history helped your mind unwind and drift a little closer to rest. If you enjoy these peaceful stories and would like more calm moments just like this, please take a second to like the video and subscribe to Quiet Boring Sleep. It really helps this relaxing little corner of YouTube grow. Wishing you a deep and restful sleep. Until next time, good night.